Hey guys, it's Sarah from Just My Typewriter, and it's not every day that I wake up and go, I think I want to go to New Jersey. I collect typewriters and I'm just seeing cases all over the place. But I just broke my not buying streak. I just paid $20 for a Smith Corona Silent, but it is the one I was missing in the 5 series, so I was very happy, and it looks like it's in great condition. So I bought a typewriter, and I wasn't supposed to. I couldn't pass it up. I didn't realize I'd be driving back on a toll road, and my driver's side window does not go down. The motor is given out. So I had to open my door in the cash lane of a toll booth to get home. So I ended up at a flea market called 5 Acres Flea Market in Belvedere, New Jersey, and this place was packed with typewriters. And I did end up coming home with my very own Smith Corona Silent, which is the final one in the 5 series for me, so now I have the full collection of the Smith Corona 5 series from the 1950s, which is my favorite series of typewriters. So this is a flea market and it was packed full of stuff. And the advantage to something like this is that they don't always know what's there. I walked in and asked the teller if they had any typewriters and she said, I don't know, maybe there's some in that room, there might be some over there, I have no clue. And to me, that's a great opportunity for a hunt because it means that they're not putting them up in a prized position, they don't have a big price on them, they don't know what's there. And so it's a little bit easier to negotiate if they don't know what they have already. So I was walking through and I spotted a typewriter case underneath a table. It was a Smith Corona Corsair Deluxe, which, you know, I'm not buying any of those, but it did indicate to me that they at least had one typewriter, and where there's one, there may be more. One of the things I've learned by going thrifting quite a bit or to flea markets or antique stores is I've learned a lot about the different case styles made by the different brands. So for example, when I'm across the room and I spot this blue plastic case with this silver edging, I know that's a Royal case, and I can probably bet that it's a Royal Safari or a similar Royal Safari body style case, because I have a Royal Safari in that body style, and I've run into other Royal Safaris in the same case shape or style. So to me, I can kind of identify the brand most of the time based on the case. So for example, these blue and white cases are typically Olympia cases. I know that these ones with the round edges that have the leather trimming on them are usually Remingtons, and a holiday case is always going to have a Smith Corona in it, or it should have a Smith Corona in it. In a place like this, it's really easy to get overwhelmed because there's so much stuff, and there's piles and piles of stuff. And as someone who likes to look for treasure, it can get really overwhelming really quickly. But if you go in with a game plan, and for me that game plan is always finding something typewriter related or something on my list of thrift finds, it's a little bit easier to not get lost in the weeds. So having a game plan, quickly scanning and knowing what I'm looking for, training my eye to look for those things is a really effective way to get into one of these places and not leave feeling like I just ran a marathon with my eyeballs. So again, this guy had tons and tons of typewriters, but one of the things that was different about this place is there was not a price on anything. Now when it comes to haggling or bartering or trying to get a price down, everybody's got different tips and tricks and tactics. I have watched quite a bit of American Pickers, and I just watched all of Swap Shop on Netflix yesterday, and everybody's got their tactics for haggling. Some people say that you should never throw out the first price, always have the other person throw out the first price, react negatively to the price that they throw out to get them to come down. Some people like to point out the deficiencies in the object when they're trying to purchase it so that you can knock down the price a little bit. I tend to have a different tactic because I don't like to do that. Something about that process feels kind of icky to me. And so I tend to let somebody know how excited I am about an item. So when I'm doing something like this, I'm haggling the price of a typewriter. I took that Smith Corona Silent with me up to the owner of the shop and we started the haggling process. And he had me throw out the first number, which to me is a little bit tricky. You don't want to offend somebody when you're throwing out a number, especially if you know it's a little low, but you also don't want to throw out a number too high because there's no room to go up. I personally have set a price cap for myself on typewriters. It's a great way to keep me from buying everything I see. So I know that I can't pay more than $25. If it goes over that, I will not purchase it. But the guy selling it to me doesn't know this. So I have to be aware of that price limit going into it. And that's one of my tips as well. For any time you're thrifting, antiquing, or looking for something, go in with a game plan, items that you were looking for so that you don't get lost, but also make sure that you have a price in mind for those things so that you don't overpay or put yourself in a situation where you're leading more from the heart and it's putting you in a situation where you're not valuing that item for what it's actually worth. And then you're stuck with something that you paid too much for. So he asked me to throw out the first price, and I said 15. Now this place is dirty, it's packed, he didn't know he had it, and I had expressed how excited I was about typewriters. I told them that I was looking for typewriters, and I showed him some of the typewriters he had there. I told him what kinds they were. I had went through and put all the typewriters back in the cases appropriately because some of them were upside down. So this guy knows that I like them. He knows that I know what I'm talking about. And so when I throw out a price of 15, I was really hoping I didn't offend him. He countered with 25. And I let that sit there for a little bit. He says, I know what they're worth. You know, I've checked them out on eBay. I know what they're selling for. And that's always a difficult position to be in. People do check for the prices of items using things like Facebook Marketplace, and eBay is a big place that people go for checking the prices of, especially typewriters. Etsy's another site people go. The problem with trying to value your machine based on those prices is that if it's listed on eBay for a price, it hasn't sold at that price. It's listed at that price, but that doesn't mean that's what somebody is buying it for. And if you're going into more specialty sale locations, especially like Etsy, you're looking at refurbished machines, which also have an additional cost of the person servicing that machine in the first place, which adds a couple extra $100 to the price of that machine. So I know the kind of prices he's referencing, but I also know that he has like 8 typewriters in that room, and they seemed really excited by the fact that I was interested in typewriters. So he might not have a ton of buyers. I countered with 20. Now I was willing to pay 25, but I also knew if I could get it down to 20, that gave me a little bit more wiggle room. Eventually he accepted my offer of $20. Now that haggling technique works for me, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the right for you. But I do suggest that when you have that price in mind, you find a way to approach how you're going to offer that price or do the bartering process. I find that showing people I'm excited and telling them about things and telling them that I repair typewriters, I like that because I like them to know that I enjoy the machines. I don't want them to feel bad about letting it go for that price. And so by letting them know how much I love it and how excited I am, I find that that works for me, but it might not work for you. I encourage you to mess around with some haggling techniques to see what works best for you. I do like yard sales and flea markets and estate sales because they have a definable endpoint to them. At the end of the day, they have to pack up. And that is really a great driving factor for putting down the prices on items. Nobody wants to have to pack up a bunch of typewriters into their car. They're heavy. And so you can haggle the price a little bit because they have to get rid of them. In a place like an antique store, it can sit around for a little bit until they find the right person who's willing to pay that price. So I find it's a little bit harder to negotiate prices in places like antique stores, but I've had really great success in places like flea markets, estate sales, and yard sales because they want to get rid of them. The other thing about this bartering process is the next time I go in there, he knows I'm coming back and we already have an established price for what I'm willing to pay for typewriters. So this does kind of start to build that relationship, and we already have a negotiating process set in stone. And if he can sell me multiple typewriters at that kind of price, he can get more out of me as a customer instead of just a one-off sale on that machine. So building that relationship is also important during this bartering process. Now, one thing I didn't do, and I always recommend and I should have done, is I didn't test the machine in the store. I did move the carriage back and forth a little bit to make sure that that worked, but I didn't test the keys. And I should have, because when I got home, I noticed something. And I should have checked it in the case because the drawband has slipped. Darn it! Yeah. Got a little bit of damage. I suspect that the spring actually might be snapped. Okay, so I rewrapped the ribbon around the drum and I threw it in a little solvent to see if that would help loosen up the main spring. I still think it might be broken, but it's advancing. Now, luckily, I was able to put the drawband back in there and I was able to get it back in the slot, and it had just slipped off the drum and the drum was kind of stuck. So I threw in some cleaner into the drum to loosen it up a little bit, and I was able to get the drawband back on the drum and get it typing. But if I had seen this in the store, I might not have picked it up because I wouldn't know what I was really getting into without messing around with it a little bit. If you're a first-time buyer, a novice, somebody who's not into repair, I always suggest that you test the typewriter in person first. First of all, to see if you like it. If I had the opportunity to test some of the machines in my collection in the store before I bought them, I might not have purchased like a gazillion of them because I found things that I like about certain typewriters and things that I don't like about others. Testing things like key shapes, how the keyboard feels, how the typing action is, all of those things can be contributing factors into how much you actually use your machine. But another reason I like to type machines in the store and the location is to see how broken they are. Now, I have tackled a few repair jobs, usually with the help of my mechanic dad, and that has been a really great learning experience for me. I've learned a lot getting broken typewriters and learning how to fix them. But sometimes I run into projects that are just too big for me, and I find that if I can test a typewriter in the store, I can get a little bit of a better assessment of how much I'm willing to sink into that. And that should also impact the price you're willing to pay for a machine. If you have to repair it or put a lot of money into doing things like changing the feet, getting new platens can be really expensive. So if you can test some of those things in the store, that might help you determine what you're willing to pay for that item before you sink too much into it and then have to sink more into the repair process. So I always try to test a machine in the store. I move the carriage back and forth. I usually test a couple of the keys and the space bar and the backspace. Those are ways for me just to see if the machine is at least operational. I often also check the platen knobs because I've run into broken platen knobs before that I could have caught if I had just checked in the first place. But all of these things are great ways to check a machine before you even purchase it. I didn't do that this time because I got overwhelmed and too excited because I was looking for one, and so I just kind of picked it up. Even if you're not buying a typewriter or buying an antique in some of these environments, I still encourage you to go to places like flea markets and antique stores and yard sales because you might learn something there as well, even if you're not trying to buy something. Every time I go into an antique store, I run into something new. I run into something I've never seen before. I've learned a lot from watching a lot of thrifters on YouTube. I encourage you to do that because it is kind of fun. It's a great way also not to spend money because you can just watch them thrift and you have no opportunity to buy anything. But you can also learn a lot about the historical context of items. And I personally find that fascinating, but it also can help you identify things when you're out there in the wild. And if you're thinking about getting to something like reselling, you might be able to find a lot of information just by watching other people do it on the internet. And so when you're in a new place like a flea market or an antique store, you can apply that knowledge. Things like identifying typewriter cases, I've learned by looking at other people's typewriter cases and looking at typewriters on the internet and watching other people thrift things and pointing out typewriters. So when I go into a store, I'm also trying to learn something. And something that I ran into in this flea market that I've never seen before in person was a Varitype machine. Now, I looked at this thing and it's a behemoth. It looks so cool. It's industrial. I didn't know what it was. I know I had at least seen pictures of these before, but I didn't really know what it was beyond that it had some typewriter elements to it. And I wasn't ready to kind of go into a project and purchase it yet because I didn't really know all the information. But I was able to take some pictures of it and then go home and do a little bit more extensive research. So this is a Varitype typewriter. It's from like the 1920s into the 1930s, and it's actually an electric typewriter based on the Hammond machines that you might have seen that were also out there at the time. So the Hammond typewriters, this is the electric version. Now, had I known that when I was in the store, I might have made an offer on it, but I bet he's wanting more for this one than the Smith Corona Silent that I purchased, because these are a little bit harder to find. I also don't know what I'm getting into if I purchase something like this because there's electricity involved, and we know my history with electricity. So I didn't make an offer on this. However, I noticed it was under a taxidermied fish. so the likelihood that it'll still be there if I decide to go back is high. But I did learn something from this trip, and now I can keep that in mind the next time I'm out. I might run into something else like that. And every time I go out, I try to make sure it's also an informational experience, that I'm learning something or running into new things that I can learn more about when I get home. It's important to do your research after you pick up a machine so you're constantly learning and adding more to your tool belt when you go out into the wild looking for things. So that was my flea market find in New Jersey. It's a cute little 1950 Smith Corona silent machine in the brown color. It's got the racing stripes across the top. I love the 5 series. I had all of them except for the silent, so I knew that this was one that I was looking for. And so when you have identified machines like that, it's a little bit easier to pull the trigger on purchasing them when you run into the wild. It also makes it a little bit more like a treasure hunt. I hope these tips and tricks are also helpful to you. I always find it's easier to go in with something that you're looking for, a list, some sort of budget, a negotiating pattern or way that you're going to be approaching it, and always leave with more knowledge than you went in with. It's important when we're doing something with historical items to continue to carry on the knowledge of these machines. Someday there will be a world where nobody knows how to fix typewriters. And so I always find it's really important to continue to research, to learn new things, and take that knowledge with me and share it with other people so that we don't run into a world where nobody knows anything about the past. But that's just my approach to going to flea markets, yard sales, antique stores, all those good places. If you're interested in more typewriter content, I do some other videos on this YouTube channel as well as on Instagram at just.my.typewriter. I want to thank you all so much for watching and remind you, you're just my typewriter.